I'm 9 years old, and I find myself sitting alone in front of one of the most famous doctors at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, on the East Coast of the United States. I have no idea why my parents brought me there, but before I knew it, he showed me two photographs, a penis and a vagina, and he said to me, "Do you know what they are?" And I said, "Yes." He asked me which one I had, and I pointed to the female photograph. And then he asked me which one I wanted. I looked at that male photograph. Mine was missing. But I was smart enough not to say anything for fear of what my parents would say. It was right then and there I realized I was going to have to carve my own life. But how was I going to do it? After all, I was just a kid. You see, I was born a male in a female body in the 1950s. And some consider it a curse, but I now believe it was a gift, because it has given me the unique perspective of understanding men and women. But today, I want to talk about how men stifle their emotions, how I can relate, and how we can help them share them. I grew up, there was so much fighting around clothes. When I went to school, there was a dress code. I was forced to wear a dress with crinoline that was itchy and scratchy. I envied the boys because they could wear T-shirts and jeans, but I couldn't talk about it. I was a boy, and I harbored that secret inside. And although I wasn't conditioned and socially conditioned like a boy, I watched my father like a hawk to pick up cues on how to act with people. All the while, I was lugging around a mental suitcase of heavy emotional feelings and the stark realization that this was how life was going to be. Growing up a teenager was a disaster because I could no longer hide in my mind the life I pretended to live. I didn't fit in with the girls. I was no longer a friend to boys. I was a loner. I was bullied, and I was drastically shutting down. Internally, I was living a life of low-lying anger, sadness, and depression. And when you don't have the emotional vocabulary, that's the default. But two things kept me going: quietly observing my father's calm demeanor and excelling in sports. Because when I was on the field, I was a boy. I entered college in the 1970s, and there was no more dress code. Man, was I thrilled. I didn't have to wear dresses. I could wear pants, and I could be me, right? Wrong. I was still in my mind with my emotions and my thoughts, because every day, amongst thousands of people, I was sorely reminded by the snide comments that I was a misfit. And now with my new appearance, I was constantly asked if I was a boy or a girl. Well, to fast forward, I graduated college, I worked in the corporate field for 30 years, I had relationships, but I was still covering up my emotions. After 50 years of living like a prisoner in my own body in a different place and time, and now having the internet, I searched for Girl Feels Like Boy. And I found a book written by a man just like me. Page for page, he was talking directly to me, and that was my life in print. And I realized that I was not crazy anymore and that I wasn't alone. There was no hesitation. I found out what I needed to do to transition to a man. I was determined not to live one more day in sadness and sorrow. So on January 4th, 2011, while I waited for that first vial of testosterone, I knew that my life was going to change forever. I was excited, I was happy, but apprehensive because the waiting was over. After decades of dreaming of a life I thought I could never have, it took me 3 years to medically complete, and here I stand. Finally, I realized that I was emotionally set free. Looking back, I realized that my emotional health was tied with my identity. And so today, I want to help as many men as possible achieve their real emotional health. So why is it that men can't express their emotions? Well, they have been socially conditioned to tamp down their emotions, to buck up, suck it up, and don't cry. And they're stifled and not allowed to develop that emotional vocabulary and use it. So after years of covering up, it's hard to open up and relieve stress and to be able to cope in a healthy manner. Unspoken words affect us all, eventually. So what do we do to help men understand their emotions, and what can I do about it? Well, I'll tell you. The greatest gift that I feel you can give yourself is a few minutes a day of uninterrupted, quiet time to grab a notebook and a pen and start writing. And that's exactly what I did back in college in those bleak years. I had a conversation with my best friend's mother, and she told me to write my emotions down. And even though I was hesitant, I went out and bought that black and white speckled notebook, and I sat in a seafood restaurant staring at a blank page which seemed like eternity because my pen wouldn't move. But suddenly I had a mental and emotional shift, and when I looked down again, there were pages of emotions, none of which I could have ever expressed before. I realized that the harsh words and the taunts could no longer hurt me, and that I could grow alligator skin and ignore what the rest of the world had to say. Releasing those pent-up emotions were liberating. In my mind, I was no longer tethered. I read what I had written. I closed that book. I stood straight up, and with a sense of relief, I walked out, only to be followed by some cats that smelt that fish smell. So, where do we go, and what do we do about this? First off, for men, this is how I see it. You have to take and understand that, like, for example, I'll give you an example. Journaling, I know you guys are thinking journaling are for women, but really that's not so. There have been articles written by the Harvard Business Review about great leaders like Richard Branson and Bill Gates that are often seen reflecting with a pen and paper. And you could use your laptop, but who wants to backspace, correct typos, interrupt your train of thought, and who cares about your penmanship? If you can read it, just write it. Think about it. Where do all those autobiographies come from? Heck, you could be the next best-selling author. In a world that goes by fast, we need to slow down. And in your book of reflections is you and your thoughts. So what do? You take your private journal, and it's yours. And I know a blank page can seem like an obstacle, but view it as an opportunity to have an honest conversation with yourself. Who cares about the grammar? Just write without judgment or censorship. So here's a few ideas for you. Are you satisfied with work? Do you like your job? Are you having relationship issues? What are your options? Just write those steps down. But before you close the book, read what you've written, because you need to have a takeaway, no matter how small it is, to put into action, whether it's somebody you can talk to or it's something you need to do. Remember, insights mean absolutely nothing if you don't apply them. And for me, with all those decades, the only thing I had was a journal. It gave me clarity, it gave me peace, and it gave me direction. And I would also encourage you to find a mentor. Maybe it's somebody you know who can help you towards your emotional health. For me, it was my dad, unbeknownst to him. He towered over me at 6'3", with his social grace, his impeccable appearance. He moved through life with a sense of ease, and he had a suave way of interacting with people. One day in my mid-20s, when I was driving to work, he turned to me and he quietly said, "I know that you have been conflicted inside for all these years. I have seen it. I raised you to have logical reasoning, confidence, compassion, and to be independent. And I have no doubt that you'll figure it out." Well, Dad, it took me quite a few decades, and I did figure it out. And now I am your son. What I have learned is that a real man is more about how he behaves, his integrity, his emotional well-being, and his sense of identity. And of course, it wouldn't hurt to dress nice either. I understand how you feel inside. I suppressed my emotions for many decades, okay? And if I can find the way and the courage to make the biggest change late in my life, what would your life look like if you were emotionally free? Thank you.